So Tessa, I'm so excited that you're joining us in this Femme Futurist Society experience slash experiment slash club that we are very delighted to be forming here as we get to meet such extraordinary thinkers and doers around the world. So thanks for joining in and telling us a little bit more about you.
Thanks for having me.
So how do you describe yourself? I think we all have different ways of describing us and our work. So when people ask you, what do? What do you say?
Yes, these days I describe myself as a foresight strategist. And then that leads to the inevitable question of, what does that mean? And then I say I research what the future could be or might be, and then use that to help people make decisions about what they're doing today.
So I was reading something that you wrote recently about the challenge of having so many choices right now when you're doing this sort of scenario design or imagining what the future could be, that we're sort of overwhelmed by the plethora of choices. And then part of the challenge right now is figuring out how to narrow it down. Is that right?
Yes. Well, and I wrote that in the beginning of the pandemic.
That's right. Right. Yeah, you're right. Right. That was in April.
Yeah. When everybody was going just crazy with trying to understand what was happening, trying to not just understand what was happening in the current moment, but use that to then say what will happen in the next 3, 6, 12 months. And it just seemed like such a foolhardy exercise because we were just right in the middle of a massive moment of transformation and change and uncertainty. And it was kind of like and I don't want to say call to action because it was the opposite of that. It was like saying, hey, this is actually a great time to just sit back and listen. And when your work is to help people understand what the future could be, this would be a great moment to actually sit back and listen, even if it's for like 2-3 months. Like the world's not going to stop if in that time you're not producing scenarios.
Right.
You know?
So it's funny because I wrote something like 10 days after we got the bad news here that South by was canceled. So on March 23rd, I wrote what we will know and what we won't know. 6 months later. And it was really interesting to see. It was just sort of a stream of consciousness thing. I just started thinking about like what, because we in some ways we bring all this foresight experience to this to try and help other people navigate when this feels so shocking to them. And technically it's a little less shocking for us. And so it was interesting to see, how much we did sort of intuitively know that has sort of proven itself to be even more true 6 months and then a year later.
Yeah.
And then some things that we didn't. Like we had this conversation recently about, we may know that certain events are coming. We don't know when. And what we don't know is how people are going to react. We are now saying that foresight is such an important tool / perspective / whatever you want to call it, way of thinking. And I'm really sorry about all this ambient noise that's happening all around my yard today. So hopefully you guys aren't hearing it. But if we think about foresight as being such an important thing, how do we cultivate that for people who don't have that natural curiosity to ask about why? Like, where are you finding, like, I don't know how much of your work is in that realm right now where we're trying to help people cross the divide. For him, this is a much less comfortable experience.
Yeah, it's, I think the best approach is probably an indirect approach. And most of us so much of this goes deep into just interpersonal skills as well, and conflict resolution even. We're so used to, especially in a work environment, having, probably also in family environments, but we're so used to feeling like we have to have knowledge. We have to know the information. We have to be able to come back with something intelligent to say. And so we spend a lot of our time listening, formulating our response, rather than actually listening and trying to understand what's being heard. And so in the futures work that I do, it's really basic. And I don't mean easy, but just like foundational in starting to talk about when you're observing something new and different, just begin by describing and understanding what it is before you start to hypothesize what you think it means. So take the time to really dig deep and understand, well, what is this? Like, why is it happening? Who's doing it? How are they doing it? What need is it meeting? Before you start to draw conclusions on, oh, I don't like this, oh, I do like this, we need this, we don't need this.
Or you even assume the reason why without digging a little deeper, potentially, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Like when it's like, why is this happening? It's not like a judgment-based why, but literally it's connected to what need is it meeting? Like what are they out there doing?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I did, again, this session earlier today, and one of the executives decided that in this 90 minutes, it'd be great to do a breakout so that we could engage people more. And first, the team was a little unsure if they could figure it out logistically, and then they did, and they were really proud of themselves, and we got this whole thing sorted out. And as soon as we went to breakout, about a third of the folks dropped off. And then there was this whole kind of conversation afterwards about why. And I was like, you know what? We don't know. It'd be really good to find out. Right? Was it just that the session was too long? Was there another meeting that got scheduled at the right time? Did people feel like breakouts weren't useful? Did they disengage from the topic? I mean, the media assumption is somehow we did something wrong, and we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to maybe there was a way of structuring it differently, or just finding out again what was going on for people. Maybe they just were zoomed out at that moment. But it was just an interesting thing immediately to go to. We think we know what the answer is. We don't always know what the answer is.
Yeah.
And I would say, it's just on a personal side. I am really good at this professionally. I keep a very, very open mind professionally and personally. I draw a lot of conclusions really quickly. I have this really good intuition for knowing that something is off, or knowing that there's I can sense that something's up, but my interpretive skills are a little less useful on the personal side than they are on the open professional side. So the good news is I'm aware of it, and I always talk about that being a professional hazard, but it is funny how we don't necessarily apply it appropriately in all domains of our lives.
Well, in the I think our emotional connection to what's happening will alter our ability to be objective and more methodical in our thinking.
Which is why I think it is useful that we can come in from the outside and offer help. But now you're inside Dolby. So talk about what it feels like to be inside. How long have you been there?
I've been there for just under 2 years. And in those 2 years, I took 6 months off for maternity leave. So I still feel like somewhat new.
Right. And in the middle of all this craziness, right?
Yeah. So being inside it's been awesome. It's been really nice. It's such a shift in pace and mindset from being an external consultant. But my job, my role, which I've been shaping as I've been there, because I'm the first person internally whose job is futures work. Which is not to say I'm the only person who's ever done or thought about the future or thinks about the future, but I'm the first role whose sole purpose is this stuff. And
that's sort of surprising. I'm just going to step back for a second and say, again, a decade ago, and if not more, we kept thinking there should be a chief futurist, or there should be a futurist. Like, I used to always call, I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek New Generation. Did you ever watch that? Because there was Counselor Troy, who sat at the right hand of Picard, who was the captain of the Starship Enterprise in that series. And she was this amazing intuitive who would say yes or no, or here's what you're about to see when you get to this, planet, and here's how they're feeling about this. And she was just an extraordinary aid. I mean, without her, would not have been successful. And I think in later episodes she became captain as well. But it was just this interesting way of being able to guide into the unknown, right? Yeah. She became this really a crucial person. And I always thought, how do organizations do it without some version of this thinking on their teams? And so I think it is interesting to see that we're seeing now more people who have this formal role inside the organization.
Well, that's the thing. It's just, I think it's becoming formalized. People have been doing this, not probably, but people have been doing this for, I don't think you can run a company or organization without it in some form. But now I think it's just being much more formalized and structured in a way where in the past it's maybe just been a little bit more like individually driven.
Well, you saw this more with IFTF. I think when I see it from mine, it's they're visionary executives, right? Or even not just executives, they're curious people inside every organization. Yeah. And I would argue 10 to maybe 20% are intuitively again, in the same thing that you talked about, running around asking why and trying to understand from a systems perspective. And there's a organizational development person named David Dow who used to write about this, about the people whose brain reward is to learn something new and turn other people onto it. He thought it was only 5% of the population, and the rest of them were all about learning new to master. I think it's a little higher than 5 from my experience, but there are people intuitively inside that organization. But I think that what has been challenging is that they haven't always found voice or the people were excited about what they had to share. Right. Yeah. They could talk about this stuff and they felt it. And then when I would come and speak, or they hear someone like you, they get very excited about, yes. But inside the organization, it hasn't always been given voice. And so I think that the idea of formalizing it is that it's seen as something that we should be paying more attention to.
Right. Yeah. And when it's not formalized, it also means that if it's not tied to your actual job, then it's hard to actually have the time to do it in a way that is productive and effective for the work.
So how do you describe what your role in is there? Like, what is your mission?
Well, so my mission is to figure out my mission, which is so luxurious and fantastic. And it's so part of my job is to like float around the company and figure out where my work and my intuition makes sense. It's a very intuitive process as well, right? But I mean, in a more structured way, it's coming out in two kind of pathways. One pathway is like internal partnering on whatever scale of conversation or project it could be. So whether that's on like a new product or a business, or some sort of internal system or thought process that needs to be brought together. So that's one track is internal consulting. And then the other track is building up capacity across the company. So creating a program of sorts across the company to do more structured futures research and thinking and tying that to the business itself.
Okay, again, this is a theme that we're hearing a bit more from these conversations with other Femme Futurists. It'd be interesting for you guys to connect us. Maybe someday, if we ever figure out Clubhouse or whatever, Facebook, actually not Facebook these days, but whatever the knockoff will be in the next 2 weeks, it would be interesting to have this conversation about how does one start to build that capacity inside an organization. And then the next question that I have then, because it came up a little bit again in the session this morning, is how do you do that when we're all remote? Like finding yourself into an organization in which you have an undefined role. Somebody once told me that I have an ambiguous process that leads to an ambiguous deliverable. That makes it a little tricky for people. But it all turns out successfully. It's just that, you have to have a lot of trust along the way that we kind of know what we're doing and how we're doing it, because it's not as easy to map out and describe. But if you're doing that in an era where you're not connected to your coworkers, right? You don't get to just kind of like walk into a meeting. Like I've struggled with that a little bit, even in the AI company that I consult with or work with, is sort of knowing how to insert my perspectives or where I think I could be really helpful inside the ongoing process of the work that didn't include it prior.
Yeah. Well, I think interestingly, this kind of a role, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, because my role requires a lot of self-driven activities, because nobody's waiting for me to do anything, and nobody is like giving me the road to travel.
Right.
And so I have to take the initiative to connect with people internally and build my network internally, build my social capital. And that comes from building relationships. And I can do that virtually and I can do that in person. It actually doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear.
And then the other thing that I just realized, because I was thinking about this, about whether or not there would be a large benefit to going back in person. And if I never went back in person, would that be a hindrance, I guess is the way of putting it. And right now I'm working with a team where it's been all virtual, and I'm helping them think about the future of out-of-home entertainment. And it's reached a point where I was like, okay, now I need to put in some processes where back in the day I would say, okay, let's get face-to-face for a half a day or something. Let's have a workshop for half a day. And then I realized, you know what, it could actually be a better process without that large chunk of time, where it's sort of like flipped classroom style. I think some of the same stuff that education is going through, as a facilitator or a content facilitator, I don't need to sit there and watch you do your exercises. It's a total waste of time, really. And it's also a bit of a weird dynamic. And in the large workshops, the issue of the report out, like sharing the work that has been done, that's like a piece that's always a little bit, it's just a little bit off. It never kind of lands at the same level that I feel like it should land. And so in a virtual world, instead of having everything done in the same place at the same time, we can all come together in a virtual setting, share the underlying content, set the expectations, and then in our own time over X amount of days, meet in smaller groups, do the heavy thinking and the heavy work, and then come back together refreshed and eager to hear from each other. So I think it actually forces potentially a much better way of doing it. Part of me there's something really great about being together for 1 or 2 or 3 days in these intensive times. But it's not necessarily the most productive way of actually absorbing difficult information.
I think it's fascinating. Hopefully you're right. I know you've got no time and probably no sleep, but I do think hearing other people and how they're experiencing this is really, really helpful, because it's a question that comes up over and over and over again. And then it takes me to, it seems to me like in your environment, it would be the perfect place to lead people into a virtual environment. So have you guys been experiencing or experimenting with virtual reality work sessions or places to gather?
Yeah, actually some of my colleagues in HR in the people function, and their job is ostensibly nothing to do with virtual reality, but they have sessions in virtual reality.
Oh, that's great for them. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you know what platform y'all use? I'm just curious which ones are working.
No, you know what? I've been so in essential mode is one of the buzzwords here at Dolby that I haven't had much opportunity to just kind of do things that aren't directly related to the work that I'm doing.
Right.
So this is on my to-do list, is to get into that space with my colleagues.
Yeah, I am curious, because I'm curious about how it works too, right? We've known that there's this company, spatial.io, that has a version of this right now, an early version of it. And I've played around with it on my computer, and it's really unsatisfying. I shouldn't say that in case you're watching.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about spatial audio?
No. I'm talking about spatial virtual reality, where you and I would have had this conversation in a virtual world.
Yeah.
But there's a version that you can do it on your computer, but it's not designed for that. It's really clunky and it's not satisfying. You have this weird avatar, but it goes back to what we talked about before when we have a fake background. It just doesn't work. But I'm sure if you put on the goggles, or if you put on the headset, it would be much more interesting. Yes. And so anyway, bought one for my son at one point. I need to steal it back before I make another investment, because I'm curious to play around with it more and sort of see what the sensation of it is. And it's been interesting. Again, as we discussed before, my children are much, much older than yours, but even watching them start to experiment with some of these technologies. So a few years ago at Christmas, I gave my oldest son an Oculus headset. And it was really interesting to see how he and his friends, there were all these 6 foot tall, big guys, would immediately go to all the scary content and try and do the stories about what's under your bed, or what's on the dark road, or what's in the whatever. And I was downstairs one day and they were upstairs, and it sounded like a herd of rhinoceroses were in my office. I'm like, what has just happened here? And it was like one of the boys had just gone to some really scary thing and was freaking out, and all the other boys were laughing because they were watching him have this experience, because they had all gone to that dark place, already knew what he was in for, kind of a thing. But it was so fascinating to kind of watch this interaction. Right, to watch and then to think about. So then you go to the why, or I go to the what does this mean?
Yeah.
And I start to think about, will they be desensitized when they just go to a regular movie or try and watch something on Netflix, which is already happening, to be quite honest. The experience between gaming and that are so intense and so fast that it's really hard to hold his attention for a full movie.
So you're finding that your one child,
well, this is the oldest one. This is the more tech guy. So he's the guy who just got a master's in aerospace. So he's less the why, and he's more the engineer.
Interested in watching a full movie.
Yeah, he won't watch a full movie. And actually, I will say neither of my kids. Well, my daughter will, but maybe the 2 boys really, it's a struggle to get them to do it. One won't do it because he really loves more nonfiction stuff, and he just thinks storytelling is not interesting. And he's actually studying virtual reality and augmented reality at UT, and is
getting a degree. Like storytelling.
He likes
virtual reality for.
For him, it's much more about the augmented side of it, and then the.
What is he interested in it for? If it's not storytelling, is it for?
I think he's more interested in it in terms of how it will, like, where you can go to a concert in virtual reality, or you can play a game in virtual reality, or you can experience flying in virtual reality, right? But not like telling a story. Yeah. And he's just not a narrative guy. He's like dyslexia, and it's just never been his thing. Yeah. He loves like sort of the real world and how it works. Yeah. Versus Hugo is all about that, Mr. Fantasy, Mr. Gamer, Mr. Technologist, and like I say, has really is really curious about that world and is interested in trying to figure out where he plays in it. But just his experience in it, and again, like he also runs through the world with like a Twitch stream or Reddit stream like in front of him on his phone all day long. Like he's got the whole world annotated, even though he's walking through it in real life, because he just wants all these layers of information, and just sort of his brain can't take it in fast enough. And so we have this whole conversation. So I'm turning it back to you in a second to say, when we think about youth and whether or not they're just unprepared for the future, or whatever the word is, self-medicating is not the right word, but kind of losing themselves in these media. We've always had the previous generation that thinks that is terrible. And a friend of mine who's really one of the most savant coders and is restructuring the entire internet will tell you that that's actually preparing them extraordinarily well for a future in which those will be the skills that are in demand. But when you think about your own children, and I know, again, they're so young, but you think about the scenario work that you're doing, is there something that's informing your parenting guidance or philosophy as you imagine the future they're heading into?
Yeah, well, before I get into my kids and my parenting, I just want to touch on some entertainment stuff, which is I've been talking about lately. Some of the things that you brought up parallels a lot of what I've been seeing, which is there's a general collapsing of entertainment categories, where movies are not movies, games are increasingly narrative and movie-like. There's lots of experimentation in making movies more dynamic and reactive and almost game-like. And music isn't gaming. It's just all the categories are kind of collapsing. And then there's this whole new space of experiential and very kind of hands-on, tactile entertainment that is probably going to be much more enticing to younger people as they grow up than the more passive, like consuming whatever storyline is coming at me.
But totally, and to your point, this idea that they were in discrete, whatever experiences or genres. I remember actually but an early concert that I took my children to was when we went to the Hollywood Bowl, and we got to hear all the music from games, from World of Warcraft, whatever, played by an orchestra at the Hollywood Bowl. Right. Yeah. And then they had these interesting things that were flying around in the sky. I forgot what they did. Some sort of projection art that was in the sky. So it was just really interesting. Yes, it was classic music played with an orchestra, but with all those heightened things that had to do with accompanying a game. Yeah.
A great way to bring classical music to your kids.
It was super cool all the way around. Because again, this is the fun part. Someday, actually, I think what we should write together, maybe this is the project, is we segregate the ones of us that are moms. Because I think this idea of being a futurist mom is really fascinating. Right? We just have a really different perspective about how we're bringing up a group of kids that aren't hopefully as anxious and as scared and as unprepared for this fast-moving future that we're heading into. And that's why I think it's always interesting to talk to parents about how this is informing. Because for me, for sure, those two things have gone back and forth. It's like two sides of a coin. I'm a better mom because I'm a better futurist. Because I'm a futurist, and I think I'm a better futurist because I'm a mom.
Okay, can you tell me more about how you think you're a better mom because you're a futurist? How does that inform you?
Tons. There's a zillion examples, but when I think about the world that they're heading into, right, I have shifted some of my distance. So the clearest one that I can probably give in real time was when my oldest son was a senior in high school, and he had been a varsity wrestler for 4 years, but was really not enjoying that last year and wanted to leave the team. And, my traditional, parenting thing would be like, no, you signed up for something, you're responsible, you don't leave a team. Like, this is like all the ethics of leaving a team would be terrible. No. And at the same time, I'm doing all this work thinking about teenage anxiety and depression and suicide. And one of the things you read is that the kids feel like they've got no agency and they can't make their own decisions. And then you're watching the documentary about the race to nowhere. And so you've got to try and figure out where do you fit in? And we're in a highly, highly competitive school district that's like the best of the old world. So I'm really aware of the fact that, what I'm there's a reason that we moved here, and I'm okay with the decision that we made, but it's a very interesting thing to recognize that this is there's nothing to do with self-directed learning around here. This is all about the AP, class and the exam. So I'm triangulating all these different things. At one point, I think I may have just expressed the tiniest bit of curiosity about listening to your point about what was really going on for him. And man, the fact that he saw the door cracked even an inch and a half, Tessa, he body slammed through it. And so we had this whole conversation about, I hate that he's going to make a decision that he would regret in the future. And he's like, you know what, if this is the thing that I learned from this experience, then how valuable would that lesson have been? Dang, you're good. And so, I let him quit. And he, to this day, thanks me for it. Is so relieved that he didn't have to go through it again. It turns out later on that there actually may have been a big drug problem that was on the team. And he didn't want to be around that, which I didn't know. So, just that idea that I was able to kind of suspend what I thought good parenting looked like and really calibrate it more to the actual context that was happening around me and to where I think the future was going was really, really helpful for all of us. Yeah. So that's probably the best example. And then we have 4 words that are stenciled on the wall downstairs that are kind of the blueprint for my kids. And they've written about them all in their college essays, which is wonder, thank, do, repeat. And if they can just live in that place of their own curiosity, right, of gratitude for what it is that they know and are curious about, and for those who can help them express it, do something with it, and then it's not a one-shot deal, right? It's the perseverance and the constant curiosity and the expression of that. So I think that it just has opened me up to be a less rigid. I would have been a super control freak parent without it, and I think that by having this perspective, I've learned to be more not so much in the moment, but understanding the bigger context. And certainly. And I write about fluidity right now and how important that is in all these different ways. And so it's allowed me to be that. And again, I'll also say who knows where this goes, but so far I've got 3 happy, healthy kids that are surviving in a moment in time. We see the statistics going all the opposite direction. This is April 2021, and I was reading an article this morning. I was actually thinking on NPR about college admissions this year and how definitely really, really challenging it was for students. And my daughter just went through it. And the school they profiled was one that she's going to. And they literally listened to the admissions director talk about how challenging it was, that they had to do this off-site. They had 16% more applicants, and they couldn't use test scores anymore. So all of a sudden, all of that, and almost every single essay they read, Tessa, was about anxiety and depression and how it started to burn out their own counselors. And they had to take more frequent breaks before they could go back into reading these essays. So I think the fact that I had a child who wrote an essay about wonder and think and not
anxiety,
and that, was probably the thing that got her into the school. So you, back to you. What do you? How's it informing how you do what you do?
Well, it's so interesting for me. Sometimes I wonder about what's informing what. Is it my work that's informing my life, or my life that's informing my work? And I'm sure it's a very back and forth kind of relationship. But I would certainly say that some of the same things around understanding context to any specific thing is really critical. I mean, my kids are 11 months now and, a month away from 4. So I don't have to understand the context for them quite yet. But I would say, I think I've always been trying to build a family for a world that doesn't quite yet exist.
Tell me more.
At IFTF, they talk about foresight, insight, action, the foresight, insight, action cycle. And my family life and my family structure is very much in the, and then I made a riff on that. It was like foresight, insight, embody, embody the future that you're trying to, that you want, your preferred future. And so I feel like in many ways, my family life is me embodying that future that I want, not for my family, but for the world writ large, and also my family. But it creates a lot of exciting opportunities to think about what could be, how we want to structure our lives, and also a lot of challenges. And so, I mean, I guess the crux of it all is that my husband and I come from 2 very different backgrounds, and very intentionally. I mean, not intentionally in that, you don't really choose who you fall in love with, but there's the different backgrounds are part of the exciting dynamic. So, I come from a Danish American background, urban, middle class-ish. My life is middle class. And he comes from rural farming community in Kenya. And so combined, we hold the knowledge of the world, You have
I like that perspective.
You have farming knowledge. You have knowledge of the earth, knowledge of like deep culture and deep tradition, which most of us don't have anymore.
Right.
You have knowledge of like the Western urban life, and you bring those together, and not just for my kids. That's just access to so many different things, so much diversity in thinking and how to engage with the world. That makes me really excited. And so bringing those two worlds together is a mission. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. But ultimately, the hope is to transition to Kenya as the home base, and then have a very kind of international life where we can have home base in Kenya and also home base here. Maybe at some point we can throw Denmark in there when we settle in. And then through Kenya, there's an opportunity to have like deep engagement with the earth and farming and traditional culture. And also Nairobi's a massively cosmopolitan place. So connection to all of the kind of dynamic energy, high-tech kind of things, creative arts kind of things that are happening there. And then you fold Silicon Valley into that and everything. And so to me, that's part of like the future of where the world is heading, but it's also the world that I want. Like I want us to be in a place where these different kinds of backgrounds and orientations to the world, they come together. And from my international development background, one of my big missions when I was doing that work was to say, those of us who are working in international development, who are typically people of means, we're never going to solve inequality. We're never going to solve, because poverty isn't like a thing in and of itself. It is a dynamic that's part of inequality. And you can never solve that if you're just bringing together the people of means to talk about, these other people's problem and how we solve it. And so if we can't even design a workshop or a process where you bring together the real decision makers within USAID, for example, and the farmers that they're trying to, save, you're not going to ever accomplish anything, because part of the issue is the fact that we can't actually we can't talk the same language, even if we're saying the same words. And so that's, I think, where my model for the family I want to build kind of parallels with some of the futures work that I've done and some of the kind of insight that I've had as I've gone through that work.
I think that's brilliant. Your kids are very, very fortunate to be in such a rich environment. But I think to your point, there are so many, there are decisions I've made. I forgot the one in particular, but there's a moment where I think there are things were going to be kind of a little tumultuous for my kids. And I thought, you know what? If I'm just teaching them to be more adaptive, that is exactly what the future needs and expects. Yeah. Like, again, I think it was less, if I held myself to whatever that standard or whatever the 1950s parent was supposed to be, I may have been more upset about some of the choices that were going down. And instead I'm like, you know what? No, I'm just going to help them roll through them. And they'll be that much more prepared. So I do think that lens of knowing what you want it to look like or what you think what some of those qualities are. I can offer a moment of unsolicited young parent advice.
Yes, please.
There's a great book. I hope it's still available. It's called Your Self-Confident Baby by Magda Gerber. And I think about this a lot in terms of the future because she had such a prescient point of view about raising kids that were inner-directed and self-directed and a way of being able to have this confidence of being able to handle the environment around them that I think we've robbed children from the very beginning. So when you talked about they're so young, you don't have to think about context. I would argue it starts literally from the moment they're born. Yeah. There was a way in which I raised them, like I got exposed to Magda's work and Magda's thinking and Magda early on, and it really course corrected me. But it was going against the grain of what everyone in Southern California was doing at the time. And so having that confidence that I was in the right place. Yeah. And doing it the way that I felt like was really going to prepare kids for this world that we don't know what it's going to look like. And what you really just need, right, is that sense of self and that sense of confidence and sense of agency and that sense of empathy and, and grit and integrity. And if I could just build it around that, then, job well done. And but that book helped me a lot. So I'm a big advocate for that, not just in terms of parenting, but I want to build the future that I want to see, which is people walk through it feeling capable of being big contributors to it and good citizens in it. I think that book helps a lot and starts like literally from day 2.
Great. I will.
So yeah, I hope it's still around. If it's not, let me know and I'll try and dig it out. But it just, I have found that to be, again, for someone who thinks about it just in terms of systems, just something, I think it would just ring true to you.
I certainly know context matters from birth. I meant like, my son, Teo, who's almost 4, when I talked to him about the decisions he's making, it's hard, he's just beginning to kind of, formulate ideas and communicate them in a way where I can trust what he says is what he actually is thinking and meaning.
Right.
So I can't really think too deeply about what's happening in that space.
Right, fair enough. Well, this goes back to, again, where my misinterpretation skills in personal life might have done me in. I think being a bit more, giving more room for interpretation is probably a really smart thing. So I remember there's like little things that happen, right? Because partly also, just remember, we're both also strategists. We're not just foresight. So I had some of this capability or this tendency before I really understood what future study or foresight was. I would just like try and link a whole bunch of potentially unaligned things together to make sense of them. Right, exactly. So I'm like, I don't know if I really got that right or not. But it is. I mean, it's a beautiful thing that we get to experience it from all these different perspectives. Yeah. So as we round the corner, I told you we can never get through these things in a short enough amount of time. Is there anything that you are either working on right now or really passionate about that you want to turn us on to?
Well, it's all, so everything I'm doing is internally focused right now. So there's nothing coming up, but these days I'm not even active on social media. But if there is something noteworthy, I just post it on LinkedIn. So, and I think that's where you guys reached out to me.
Yeah, that's where it seems to be. Honestly, that has become my de facto social media platform. I have walked away from Facebook. I sort of was doing a little bit of Instagram stuff, but not really. And it's very funny. I just did a talk in Serbia for a technology company, a telecom company, and apparently wrote an article about it. And I couldn't understand the article because it was not written in English. But as I'm scanning through it, they've got pictures from my Instagram, including my birthday party where I dressed like a goddess for a birthday thing. And I'm like, whoa, how did that just end up in a telecom article about the future? I'm like, I've got to go figure out how to decode this thing so I can see what the connection was there. But I've sort of stopped away from sharing that kind of stuff too. So really LinkedIn is where I feel like it's become my self-directed learning place. I follow and I'm connected to so many extraordinary people who are really, really trying to build a better next and are active in communicating from their perspective.
Happening.
No, I find it to be a really great. I go to it more often. Like I'm sure that Microsoft's looking at those stats thinking, man, you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn in a day. And actually, Kathy Hackle is a person who posts a lot of really great things there, and John Hagel and Mike Pell and some people that I learn a lot from. So I'm always grateful that you guys contribute as generously as you do. So thanks for keeping me sharp. And thanks for joining us. Again, for us, it's extraordinary to just meet people who are out there doing the work who aren't freaked out about the future, who can see how we can build what it is that we want to, what is possible, I guess, and the choices that we make and what it is that we want to build. And I like being able to share this with more people. So hopefully people will find useful in this conversation, but we may also tap you, Tessa, for other conversations we get to have in other environments, because I think the more that folks can hear us in conversation or alone doing our thing, the more it gives them confidence about how to navigate all this.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me and creating this Femme Futurists Society.
And I'm also like super duper inspired by your background and thinking that, Emma, we gotta like redo this whole thing here. Like Tessa has it figured out. It looks stunning. And I'm like mesmerized as I watch you do your thing. So thanks for paying attention to that for the rest of us who are on Zoom all day. And I'm so glad we've met. So we'll stay in touch.
Sounds great.
Thanks.
Take care.